I want to welcome you all to the pre-proposal meeting for OneShoreline's planning policy guidance for resilient public infrastructure. In San Mateo County, there has been a lot of work leading up to this effort, working with our technical advisory group. And I'll speak a bit more about that tag later on, to pull together this RFP. And we're really excited to kick off this project, and really excited that a lot of you are joining and are interested in submitting a proposal on this. My name is McKenna Wong. I am a project manager with OneShoreline, the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency Project. And before we begin, a few housekeeping items. So we are recording this meeting not only for our own note-taking purposes, but also to post the recording after this meeting on our website and make it available to those who are not able to join us during this hour. You're welcome to queue up any questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen during the presentation for us to then address at the end for those who do have questions. Any questions that we might not have time to get to or not fully answer during this time today, we will post an FAQ document on our website responding to those. I'll try and capture everything that we discussed today that we're not able to answer and post responses to those by this Friday. We also have a deadline of February 12th for you to submit written questions to projects@oneshoreline.org. And any questions received by that deadline, February 12th, we will then address in a final FAQ document posted on our website on February 15th. I will also post these slides that I'll be sharing with you all today on our website following the meeting. And I think that covers a lot of the logistics. With that, I'll pass it to our CEO, Len Matterman, who's joining us today to introduce a bit more about this effort, why we're developing this guidance, why now, why is this such an urgent issue? Len, I'll pass it to you.
Sure. Thanks very much, McKenna. And I'll just talk for a couple minutes and then turn it back to McKenna to go through the project in a lot more detail. So at OneShoreline, we're focused both on project implementation related to protecting San Mateo County, both on the Bay side and Pacific Coast side, against the water-related impacts of climate change. And we're focused on planning. And last year, as some of you may know, with the help of consultant team, we put together a planning policy guidance related to the Bayside and private development. And so that focused on basically incorporating long-term climate resilience into general plans, specific plans, zoning ordinances, reviews of private development proposals, so that what's built on the Bay shoreline in terms of private development can function during its intended lifespan as our climate changes and contribute to regional resilience. And clearly, private development is not the only aspect of our society that needs to be resilient, also public infrastructure. So now we're turning our attention to that. And it's very consistent with why we were founded as an organization back in January, established on January 1, 2020. So now we're turning our attention to public infrastructure and integrating the climate risks into the planning, design, and siting of that infrastructure, the backbone of our communities. It's urgent because just as with private development, at least in San Mateo County, there's a lot of public infrastructure that's being planned either for maintenance or replacement of some kind, rehabilitation. And we want to ensure to the best of our ability as an agency that that's done in a way that is smart for future resilience. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, McKenna. This is a super important project for our agency, and we're excited to see so much interest on this Zoom and look forward to reading some of your proposals. Thanks, McKenna.
Thank you, Len. So yeah, I'll go into a brief presentation and then we'll open it up for questions. I'll introduce OneShoreline in case there are those of you who may not be familiar with our agency, and then I'll speak about the subject of the RFP, the project background, repeating a little bit of what Len said, just elaborating on that a bit more, the project tasks that were in the RFP, and then our timeline, and then we'll go ahead and open it up for questions. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District, the primary inspiration behind the creation of OneShoreline was this issue that many cities and counties, jurisdictions throughout the country face, which is that addressing the water-related hazards of climate change is just too large of a scale for any single individual entity, any city, any individual jurisdiction to address. And so this was the same in San Mateo County as of a few years ago. There was a longstanding flood control district that was operated by the county that collected taxes and worked in 4 distinct flood zones that covered about 10% of the land area of the county. You can see one of those flood zones barely touches the bay shoreline, and there's no jurisdiction of those flood zones along the Pacific coast side of the county. And so based on many studies that were done, most namely the 2018 Sea Level Rise Vulnerability Assessment that was completed by the County Office of Sustainability, it became pretty clear very quickly that climate change is a transformative issue in San Mateo County, and individual jurisdictions were really not well positioned to address that issue individually. So there was this call to establish a county-wide agency to look at this issue. State legislation established OneShoreline on January 1st, 2020. We are the first independent government agency in the state of California that wanted to build resilience to the water-related impacts of climate change. We look to take a holistic approach in our work in 3 main ways. First, to the threats. So sea level rise is a key part of what we do, but we also look at inland flooding, coastal flooding, and then how sea level rise will make those existing hazards worse. We take a holistic approach to geography. This is really the heart of why we were created, is to facilitate that collaboration, information sharing, and implementation across jurisdictions, and also with key asset owners along our bay shoreline and Pacific coast side. San Francisco International Airport, for example, is a key part of San Mateo County's bay shoreline that requires collaboration to establish regional resilience. And we also take a holistic approach to our objectives. Flood protection, of course, is key, but habitat, recreation, connectivity, both with habitat and with community, is a key part of all of our projects, and we look to weave that into all the work that we do. We have 4 main priorities, 2 of which Len touched upon. So as Len mentioned, projects, and when we say projects, we mean construction projects. Built infrastructure projects is a key part of what OneShoreline does. These are multi-jurisdictional infrastructure projects that are looking to protect from flooding and sea level rise. A big focus of our work is on the bay shoreline of San Mateo County, given how urban it is and built out into the bay. And we have termed our suite of projects on the bay shoreline the OneShoreline Bay program. And the focus of that program is to align and connect the protection and enhancement along the entire 53 miles of the San Mateo County Bay shoreline. This means stitching together projects that are already being led or implemented by others, like the Foster City Levee, and stitching together those projects and closing the gaps between those projects with OneShoreline-led projects, working with the local jurisdictions within those gaps. The second priority of OneShorelines is the planning, and that's where this RFP really falls squarely into that umbrella of work. We work with cities throughout San Mateo County on their planning processes and documents and reviewing shoreline developments in order to evaluate how those site-specific developments can contribute to regional resilience. So this was a big part of the planning document that we did over the last year, and it will become a big part of what we do with this RFP focused on public infrastructure. I'll elaborate on these 2 photos here that show both good and bad examples of what that site-specific resilience could look like. You'll see it on the photo on the left. This is a multifamily housing development in Redwood City, right on the bay shoreline. You can see that path is right up to the bay edge there. And so when we're thinking about not only the risk that this development has today, I think probably with king tides, you'll start to see water on that path and going right up into those doors and windows. But then with long term, as that bay water rises, the interventions that we can have to protect that development are really limited. If we don't want to go into the bay, we would probably be limited to a flood wall, right? That would block views And that's just not the kind of sea level rise adaptation that we want. That's in contrast to the commercial development on the right, where that building is set back a bit more from the bay. There's a bay trail between that development and bay shoreline. So there's a lot more flexibility with what we could do with that site and helping adapt to sea level rise. So a huge part of the work we do is thinking about how are the land use decisions that we're making today set us up for just and feasible adaptation to sea level rise tomorrow. Another huge category of our work is storms, alerting people and reducing the impacts of extreme events in atmospheric rivers like the one we just experienced in the last week. A lot of this is centered around our flood early warning system that we have in select creeks along the bay shoreline, and also we just built out into 2 creeks along the Pacific coast side of San Mateo County. Finally, last category of work is ensuring the sustainability of OneShoreline, developing ongoing funding streams for our work from a broad range of sources, including the private sector, and helping all these different sectors understand that climate resilience impacts everything we do and should be an issue worth investing in. All right, enough about OneShoreline. I'll pivot to the project and a bit about the project background, elaborating on what Len mentioned in his opening remarks. OneShoreline's work in this area started with a document called Planning Policy Guidance to Protect and Enhance the Bay Shoreline Areas of San Mateo County. This is a document we developed over the it's been in development for many years, but it was published in June 2023 and approved by our board. The intent of this document was a resource for San Mateo County Bayside jurisdictions, and I'm highlighting Bayside there, that the focus was on the San Francisco Bay shoreline of San Mateo County. It was a resource for those jurisdictions to account for 3 main climate-driven hazards: sea level rise, extreme precipitation, and shallow groundwater rise, in their general plans, specific plans, and zoning ordinances. So documents that are used in the review of new private developments. So the focus of this document was on private development, and particularly on 3 types of planning documents: general and specific plans and zoning ordinances. The steps that we took to develop this document over many years started with reviewing what was out there already, of course. We worked with Stanford in 2021 to take inventory of all the different examples throughout the country, mainly looking at the United States, in Boston, Broward County, Florida, Kauai, Norfolk, Virginia, New York City, Rhode Island. We also looked at some key state guidance coming from the California Coastal Commission, as well as at the time, the OPC 2018 update, sea level rise guidance update, and there's more updates since then, just recently came out. We also looked at the Adaptation Clearinghouse, which is a program run by the Georgetown Climate Center, which was very helpful for us in taking inventory of what existed already. We then took all of those existing literature review and look to tailor those documents and to what was used in San Mateo County, and tailored those to the processes and the zoning and general plan work that we've already done in our county. This started with the city of Burlingame. We worked closely with the city staff at Burlingame to pass the first zoning ordinance that incorporated sea level rise in our county and to our knowledge in the Bay Area. And this was passed in the end of 2021 and became effective at the beginning of 2022, January 2022. South San Francisco soon followed. We worked with their planning staff really closely to incorporate similar types of guidelines into their zoning update and general plan update that was approved and implemented in October 2022. And then we've continued to work with the city of San Mateo and the city of San Carlos on their general plan updates to incorporate a lot of these guidance. And all of the lessons learned from that kind of engagement of tailoring that work to the individual jurisdictions in San Mateo County resulted in a more standardized planning policy guidance that we released in June 2023, and that's now available on our website for you to look at and review. We went through a robust series of drafts to get a lot of input. We had an administrative draft that was circulated internally with select stakeholders in all the cities in the county, or all the Bay Shoreline cities in the county. And then we had a public draft that went out for a 30-day public comment period in April of 2023 that then got updated and finalized into the version of the document that went to our board. And I'm going into that level of detail because we're looking to mirror a lot of that process with this RFP. So now I'll pivot to the subject of the RFP, the planning policy guidance for resilient public infrastructure in San Mateo County. So what we're envisioning for this document is that it's a resource for all San Mateo County jurisdictions. So this is a difference from the last document, not looking countywide, not just Bayside. Service providers and asset owners that have oversight of infrastructure systems. And I'm defining all of those people as our target audience, and this is intentional. It's kind of hard to summarize all of those different entities every single time, so I'm just going to call that the target audience. We're looking for this to be a resource for the target audience to account for those same climate-driven hazards, sea level rise, extreme precipitation, and shallow groundwater rise, in the processes and documents that are used to design public infrastructure. And that's intentionally broad because at OneShoreline, we don't have a very clear sense of what those processes and documents are. For the last planning guidance, we really strategically targeted zoning ordinances and general plans. I think for public infrastructure, it's not as clear on what those documents and processes are. And so that's something that we're looking for consultant support on, is to strategically identify what are the processes that are used to make decisions around public infrastructure in our county and how can we target those. So there's the development of the document will be 3 steps. First is finalizing the types of infrastructure to be included in the document. So what is the scope of the document? The potential infrastructure types that we listed in the RFP include buildings and facilities, stormwater and sewer systems, water supply, roads, communications, and electric and natural gas utilities, and then parks and natural infrastructure. That's a really, really broad set of infrastructure types. And so we're looking for consultant input and your proposals on what makes sense to include in this document. Those are the types of infrastructure that we have flagged so far. Second step, similar to the last process, is reviewing existing documents and processes, starting with what we have in our county already. There are things like the stormwater drainage manual that the county has and other cities reference. The Sustainable Streets Master Plan that was completed by CCAG is also a really good resource in looking at how extreme precipitation will impact our county. We're also looking throughout the country and in the Bay Area. There's a capital projects guidance that the city and county of San Francisco has put together. Philadelphia Water Department has a really interesting reference. And then we're also looking at state and federal resources. So the latest OPC Ocean Science Trust update to California sea level rise guidance we're reviewing and want to incorporate. NIST, a federal agency, has done a lot of work looking at resilience planning and developing guidance. And then the California Coastal Commission has a critical infrastructure guidance that we would like to reference. That's just a sampling. There's a really robust literature review folder that was linked in the RFP that I'm hoping can be a really good jumpstart to begin this process. We don't want to spend too much time on this work. We're looking to get straight to step 3, which is tailoring those existing resources into to what the documents and processes are in San Mateo County. And to do this, we're asking for consultant support in developing a framework to identify what are those decision-making processes. And that can include conducting interviews with various infrastructure managers throughout San Mateo County, understanding how decisions are made. And it can also include developing a case study, right? Maybe there's a project and some of these photos illustrate the dire need for some of this work throughout San Mateo County. Maybe there's a project to repair damaged road, damaged section of Highway 1 on the coast side, where we could work with Caltrans and develop a case study for them to implement portions of this guidance in the process of designing that project, right? That would be an ideal scenario, but maybe we can flag some of those throughout our county and develop a stronger guidance as a result of that. This is also where our technical advisory committee will be a really key part of this process. We have convened select public works directors and asset managers throughout San Mateo County starting in November. We continue to convene that group, and we plan to really tap into that group and have that input throughout this whole project. But I think in this area, this will be particularly helpful to get their input on what is implementable, meaningful, and achievable. We want to have this document be actionable. Okay, that was a lot on the public infrastructure guidance. I'm now going to spend a little bit of time walking us through the draft table of contents for the guidance that was included in the RFP. And really, this is just a starting point, just something to give you all something to react to and iterate on. But I wanted to provide some rationale of how we're thinking about this document, and I think we'll continue to brainstorm together about this. So the first portion of the table of contents, of course, at the beginning of this document, we're envisioning some context setting, how to use this document, how does it align with existing state and federal guidance, and what is OneShoreline's role in how this guidance document would be implemented, where can we provide technical assistance, that sort of thing. We're thinking there should be some opening chapter that summarizes the existing understanding of hazards in San Mateo County, both fluvial and coastal. The fluvial hazards particularly, I think, are in need of being updated or at least collated in San Mateo County. I mentioned that Sustainable Streets Master Plan in the last slide that CCAG did. That report did a lot of really good work looking at extreme precipitation and scaling up rainfall intensities based on what we anticipate will happen with climate change. But a lot of that wasn't turned into actionable like intensity, duration, frequency curves, that sort of thing. And so I think a lot of that work will need to be, technical work will need to be done as part of this guidance. Coastal hazards, on the other hand, I think we have a pretty good set of existing data, and a lot of that would just need to be summarized and organized clearly. We're thinking there should be a chapter on template policy language. This is different than technical guidance, but this is overarching, more high-level policy language that would be appropriate for general and specific plans, local coastal plans, maybe local hazard mitigation plans. We're just starting to flag what are the appropriate policy documents that we want to target. This is just a starting list. And then most of the meat of the document we're picturing would be actionable technical guidance that would be organized based first on infrastructure type. So this screenshot is illustrating buildings and facilities, but for every infrastructure type we decide to include, we first organize by that, then by the type of hazard, whether it's the fluvial inland flooding hazard or a coastal hazard. And then we also want to organize by project type. So we've heard already from our technical advisory group that a lot of these guidance documents are often framed for new and substantial construction, which is good. And there's often the greatest opportunity to think about climate resilience when you're starting from scratch and designing a new public infrastructure project. But oftentimes the majority of projects that or public infrastructure projects are minor repairs or maintenance work where there's a really narrow scope of what and timeline of what needs to be done. And so trying to find opportunities to weave in climate resilience into that process is really important, since that's the majority of projects that are often getting approved and designed and implemented. And for each infrastructure type, so for each of these chapters, we're looking to streamline that technical guidance into these template documents. So maybe, for example, for buildings and facilities, we learn that building departments often use some sort of checklist to go through when they're reviewing a design process. And so we want to streamline that technical guidance into that specific checklist, so it can be slotted into that process that's already being used in a building department, for example. All right, now I'm going to pivot to project tasks. The scope has been separated into 4 major tasks: project management, existing document policy and process review. I've spent a lot of time talking about that. Task 3 is preparing the actual guidance document, and task 4 is that post-publication communications. How do we do outreach after the document is completed? Spent a lot of time talking about task 2, so I'll elaborate briefly on task 3, which is we're looking to mirror the same process that we did for the planning policy guidance that was published in June 2023 for private development. where we'll have an administrative draft that's for internal stakeholder review, both OneShoreline, maybe our tag, maybe a few other select jurisdictions. Then we'll have a public draft that we want to open up for public comment for a specific period of time, and then a final draft that we will bring to our board for final approval. The end goal is to have a document that is based on robust stakeholder input and that is implementable, meaningful, and achievable. Those are the three words I keep repeating to myself as I've been thinking about this project. I wanted to highlight the ways that we really want input from you all in your proposals on how to modify this proposed scope of work and modify the way that we're envisioning this. We want to see creative, thoughtful, and innovative input, particularly on the following questions. The types of infrastructure to be included, that guidance table of contents, like I already highlighted, that's just a starting point. We would love to see innovative approaches of how that could be iterated on. How can we incorporate equity into this process? And where does the technical guidance inform not just the planning and design of public infrastructure, but also the operations and maintenance, so that ongoing project life? What does that framework to identify the policies and processes in San Mateo County look like? I'm highlighting maybe interviews, case studies. I'd be very interested in hearing from you all on what's a really tight and efficient way for us to identify that framework, and then choose out of all that we find out there, what do we want to target in the guidance? Because there's no way that we're going to be able to fully capture every single way that decisions are made in San Mateo County. And what does a capacity building program look like? That's that last task after the document is published. We're looking to start an initial phase of outreach where we provide technical assistance and training to asset owners and jurisdictions on how to implement the guidance. This is something that wasn't really intentionally designed with the last document that we did, and I'm hoping to learn from that. And so that's fairly open-ended too, and we would like proposals to highlight creative approaches to that. Now for timeline, so today is the pre-proposal workshop. As I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions that you would like to submit in writing, 5 p.m. on February the 12th is the last day that we will receive those, and then I'll publish a final document answering those questions on our website. The proposal deadline is 5 p.m. on February 29th. We are looking to interview the week after that. It's a really quick timeline on March 7th and 8th, ideally in person. And all of this is quick because we're looking to execute our contract at our March board meeting, March 25th. If we're not able to hit that, we might default to our April board meeting. And when I say all of this is posted on our website, what I mean is when you go to our homepage under news and resources, and you go to the bids, proposals, and documents option on the menu under there, that's where all of this will be posted. So the FAQ document, and then following today, the meeting slides and recording, all of that is available there. There's also some proposal requirements to have exceptions to our standard agreement and to have a signed copy of our non-collusion and conflict of interest statement. All of that is also available at that same link. All right, I will now pivot to question and answer. I think given the number of people that have joined us today, I do see that there's one, let me stop sharing for a second. I do see that there's one question in the chat that maybe I'll start there, but I'll mention that I'm going to have a hard time multitasking between written and verbal questions. So I do have a preference for verbal if people are comfortable raising their hand and asking questions that way. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and then I'll go through the queue. I'll start with this first written question. Both questions actually are about our budget for this project. Maybe I'll ask Glenn to provide any input on that. Do we have, I would say we don't have anything specific.
We don't. No, we're looking for proposals that include a budget on your end. And so just, be mindful of, we don't have an endless budget at this agency. We're a small agency, but we want a robust product. So weighing all of that, we look forward to seeing your budget proposals.
Will cost be a factor in your selection process?
I'm gonna take that one too, Lynn.
Cost will be a factor in our selection process. Not necessarily the most important factor, but it will be one of several factors.
See one written question about our timeline. So we are looking at a pretty aggressive timeline for pulling together this guidance, given the urgency that Len highlighted. What was written in the RFP is that we are anticipating an administrative draft to be completed by November 1st, ahead of the holidays, so that we can review over the holidays, so that a public draft can be made public at the beginning of 2025. That is what we're currently thinking. I think we would be interested in seeing proposals, once again, with an eye towards wanting this to be a robust product. We want to hear from you on what you see as feasible and reasonable, but that's what we're currently looking at right now.
Maybe you could just say the last the last product, the one for private development, the planning policy guidance, was basically started in late 2022, towards the end of the year, and it was through administrative drafts and public draft and public comment period. It was completed about 7 months later. So this one, we're incorporating a longer timeline in that one.
Oh, this is Rachel.
Somewhat more complicated in some ways, but we do have some experience with producing these kinds of documents in a timeline that may be not familiar to folks that do a lot of work with local governments.
I have meetings completely.
Okay, and then I see a hand from Marisa.
Hello, thank you so much. I wonder in your presentation, you describe a little bit the engagement with some of the stakeholders. I wonder if you can describe a little bit more which key stakeholders are you looking for to be part of the process first, and also if you can describe also how you imagine the engagement with those stakeholders. So which stakeholders and the engagement with them.
Mm-hmm.
How in depth, how like a few workshops or more like focus groups. I don't know if you have some ideas on that, would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. So as I mentioned before, we have already convened a technical advisory group, and that's comprised of public works directors throughout San Mateo County. So both on the bay side of the county and the coast side. So we're looking for that geographic diversity throughout the county. So looking at public works departments, I think we would also, beyond the technical advisory group, want to engage with planning departments, building departments, and finance departments, essentially trying to figure out what does that capital projects pipeline look like, and how can we target people along that entire pipeline of CIP, or how public infrastructure is designed and planned. So that's in terms of jurisdictions. That's what I'm currently thinking. And then asset owners and service providers are also, we also want to target. So within our technical advisory group, we have people from Silicon Valley Clean Water, there's a wastewater treatment plant in South San Francisco that's currently undergoing an Army Corps project to make that plant more resilient to sea level rise and flooding. And so we've engaged with the plant director there. Trying to think of others that we have included. And then we have representation from the county. So county planning and building and the county office of sustainability, Melissa is on this call today, that are working on implementing sea level rise policy from the county level and through all of the county departments. So we're looking to engage with those individuals as well. We've thought about incorporating Caltrans and PG&E and other types of service providers throughout San Mateo County that might be external beyond jurisdictions. Maybe Len, do you want to speak to that a bit? We're hoping to engage. I think we're just trying to keep the group have everyone involved be really engaged in this process. And I think it might be harder if we expand the group.
Yeah, I mean, I think Marissa's question is not so much about our technical advisory group, but what kinds of outreach the consultants will be expected to do. That's how I heard it. I don't know.
Yes.
But
Thank you. No, it was very helpful to understand the group, but also
Yeah.
thank you for,
Yeah. Thank you, Len.
Yeah. So in addition to so we do want to include, as McKenna said, kind of input from Caltrans and Caltrain and some of the other key agencies that intersect with our public infrastructure or own public infrastructure. Those are things that the consultant would probably be involved with, but we wouldn't really ask the consultant to try to make sure Caltrans is meaningfully at the table, because that in and of itself could be a whole project. So that's something that we would take on. The consultant would be involved with. In terms of kind of other stakeholder outreach, community-based organizations, I don't know, environmental organizations and housing advocates, things like that. I don't know that we have a specific plan for that. I would expect that we would probably want a couple meetings that include the public in that way, and that could be a Zoom meeting or it could be some sort of workshop, as you mentioned, Marissa. But that's something we'd want to think through. In the last iteration of this, we had we had a lot of public comments. We got a lot of interest, in part because we were talking about it and there was some press about it for several months. And we'd probably do that same strategy in addition to any public meetings. But what I would say in summary, and McKenna, please augment what I've just talked about, is this is not really an outreach project. It's not a project where we involve, let's say, multiple stakeholder community meetings throughout the county. It's not like that. Our audience on this is primarily people that plan, design, site, build public infrastructure. And so it's a fairly limited audience. And that's why McKenna, I think, was focused on our technical advisory group, is that they reflect that audience.
Yeah. And then I guess I'll augment briefly in that. I think we'll focus on that target audience throughout the development of the document, maybe through focus groups and individual conversations and our tag meetings. And then when I'm hearing Len talk about workshops, I'm seeing that fit into maybe that public comment period. So when we have the draft available for public review and comment, maybe we'll hold a few workshops to introduce people to the document, have them understand what the intent of the document was, so that it can inform their comments.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Very, very helpful.
Sonia.
Hi there. Thank you. McKenna and Len, you mentioned that cost will not be the most important selection criteria. Do you know what will be?
I'll speak maybe what's included in the RFP is, items like the quality and completeness of the proposal, the experience of the firm, and the quality of the proposed solution. I'll elaborate on that where there's another section of the RFP that also talks about the qualifications. And so we're really looking for firms that have had experience developing guidance, this type of guidance before, and maybe have worked on some of those documents that were included in that literature review folder. I think that would be really useful. And then that slide that I mentioned where I'm highlighting that we're looking for those creative, innovative approaches. We're hoping that expertise from that prior experience would inform, really innovative approach to what we've laid out in this RFP. And so seeing really thoughtful proposals that iterate on what we've proposed and maybe counter on some areas of like, hey, based on our expertise, it might make sense for you to really focus on these areas or that sort of thing. That to me, I think was a really strengthens the proposal. Len, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, sorry. No, I'm not on mute. I guess I would say, right, price, experience, methodology. We assign value to small businesses and women and/or minority-owned businesses. These are all things in our kind of policies of our agency. So, yeah, that's what I would add.
And actually, I'll add also too, this is also in the RFP, but firms that have pretty deep technical expertise in the types of the infrastructure types that we highlighted, right? So having a firm that maybe has a lot more expertise in roads, but there's water supply, there's sewer, right? So all of those are each an entirely different system. And so having a consultant team or firm that has that expertise is really helpful. Lucas.
Yes, hi. Thanks, McKenna and Lynn. I have a question about what you want in terms of an actionable technical guidance. I think it's pretty open-ended, and I wanted to understand, just get a vision from you, bigger vision about the scope of what would be prepared in the technical guidance, what you'd want. What I was thinking is, you could provide qualitative narrative versus actual detailed design guidance that would be including drawings, conceptual designs, and things of that sort that would require more effort to develop. And so I don't know, I'd like to understand and hear from you what you would prefer, whether you would want basically engineering design guidance versus a more general qualitative guidance. That was kind of my first question. Second question is, you did reference in the RFP this idea of the proposals providing fluency in governance. And you mentioned that earlier a little bit. And so I'm curious whether you want the guidance to be structured in a way that would allow it to be basically entered into a general plan or specific plan and in that format, or whether that's kind of a little too early for that. I'm just not clear on that either. So those are my two questions. Thanks.
Yeah, those are both great questions. I think thinking back to the table of contents slide that I showed earlier, going to your first question on, is this conceptual engineering designs at that level of detail? I think that chapter 3, or basically the technical guidance types of chapters, I'd be interested in that kind of level of detail. I don't know, Len, if we could maybe openly discuss this, but yeah, I would be interested in that level of detail, kind of keeping an eye on this idea of something that's implementable. Something that I've learned from the last document that we did is we tried to provide some guidance on stormwater and how to size stormwater systems for future climate conditions. And it was really hard to develop language and a workflow just using text only and not having like tables and a reference chart and updated IDF curves that people can use to size upgraded storm drain pipes. And so having that level of detail, I would be interested in seeing proposals that look at that. And but at the same time, we can't go down a rabbit hole and can't develop something that's so specific that isn't able to be standardized either. So we'll have to thread the needle between specificity and standardization. But I will say, I think where you're going with that level of detail, I think is appropriate for the technical guidance chapters that I highlighted in that table of contents. Do you have any thoughts on that, Len?
I do. So our assumption is that any proposals we receive would be from consultants or consultant teams that have experience working with local jurisdictions on public infrastructure. And so those consultant teams would have a good understanding of what the cities need to, at a high level, and perhaps at a lower level, more detailed level, to implement or plan or design or site infrastructure. So, I don't think that we can sit here. That's why we have a technical advisory group, is to advise us on the level of technical details that cities and the county would need to implement what we provide as guidance. This is guidance. We're not looking for an engineering drawing of a storm drain system. This is guidance for cities that they can take and then put into their policies and processes to build resilience. So we'd look to you all who have experience on these matters, these exact matters, to propose something that satisfies that objective. Is what can we produce as guidance that cities take and then use to make their public infrastructure resilience? If you believe that what that requires is an engineering drawing of how a road should be built, or how a utility should be built, or how a storm drain system should be built, then propose on that. If you believe that's not what cities require, then propose on that. But we're looking to you and your experience in these matters to guide what you think satisfies your objective as McKenna laid it out.
And then to your second question on policy language, the answer to that, I think, is also yes, where the chapter 2 that was in that draft table of contents is looking to have template language that can slot directly into a general plan, into a local coastal plan. We have a really strong, I think, foundation with that last document that we developed. And so I think there's a lot more we can work from there and develop. So it's just maybe tailoring it a bit more towards public infrastructure rather than private shoreline development. Okay, I need to be less long-winded. I know we have 10 minutes left. Matt?
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, McKenna. I'm Matt Browning with ESA. Kind of to your question, the previous question about interacting with stakeholders. How do you see this guidance interacting with other agencies that have sea level rise planning guidance and permitting oversight, such as BCDC and the Coastal Commission?
That's a good question. Lynn, do you have any thoughts on that? How this would maybe intersect with BCDC or Coastal Commission? I think we'd be looking at what's already been developed by those agencies. The Coastal Commission, definitely, as I highlighted, we've been pretty engaged with BCDC's Regional Shoreline Adaptation Plan effort, where they're looking at developing planning guidance. And so we're tracking both of those efforts, and I think there is synergy in them. And we were actually hoping to have, I think we'll have some ad hoc BCDC input in this process as well. But I think that's something that will be more OneShoreline led and not something that we'll look for consultant support on. Okay. Rachel.
Hi, I apologize. My doctor called right as soon as I was about to ask a question earlier. I admire that you are interested in having small and disadvantaged and women-owned firms involved. Kind of two questions. Is there a particular percentage goal or guideline that you set for involvement, quantitative in this particular effort? And then also you mentioned wanting to have guidance and some specificity, particular for public infrastructure. Are you interested in involving other established kind of sustainability resilience rating systems, such as the Envision guidance system for public infrastructure, referring to those already established systems that do involve community and infrastructure that pull in some of those elements in this particular guidance?
To your second question, I'm not very familiar with the Envision system. I haven't heard of it, I guess. So I'd be very interested in hearing more about that and seeing that represented in a proposal. The one that I have heard is the READY framework, which is really focused on buildings specifically, and it's a resilience rating for buildings. And that's included in that literature review folder that was linked in the RFP. But yeah, existing rating systems and guidance that are related to those, I think we'd be interested in including in that literature review that I mentioned earlier. And I'm not entirely clear on the first question you asked, Rachel.
Will there be quantitative requirements for DBE, SBE, women-owned business enterprises, any disadvantaged for participation? Often Caltrans and other local agencies will have, High-Speed Rail has a 30% requirement for small disadvantaged firms. VTA Caltrans have a 25% requirements for monetary involvement, since that's putting a quantitative role for involvement is how you actually get small firm participation in these professional services. That's how we actually get a role. As a small disadvantaged business owner, I can speak to the fact that without a quantitative goal, there is no real goal for involvement. So I just asked the question on these types of pre-proposal meetings.
Good question. We don't have a quantitative goal at this time.
Philip.
Oh, hi. Thanks, McKenna. Thanks, Len. Yeah, my question is specific to the county assets, right? The county-owned assets, such as levees, pump stations, and all of the unincorporated areas. The last guidance was pretty prescriptive. Do you anticipate that the county assets, in particular levee elevations and stuff, are as prescriptive and that the county will adopt this guidance itself? Or is it, in other words, is it still a voluntary guidance for the county, or is this going to be adopted by the county as the first implementer of the guidance policy?
It's similar to the last guidance where it is voluntary. OneShoreline does not have land use authority beyond specific areas of the 4 flood zones that we've inherited from the county. We don't have right of way beyond a lot of those areas. So we're not, approving permits, for example, for certain projects or development. OneShoreline itself isn't. What we're hoping to do is support the entities that are doing that process, to incorporate this into those processes. But it's voluntary for them to do that. So it's not a mandatory document. It's something that is trying to be a resource for entities that are making those more prescriptive decisions. Len, maybe I can ask you to support on the question of, are we going to be providing the level of detail in terms of prescribing elevations, that sort of thing? I think that's something Len and I have talked a little bit about, whether we would have something like the One-Shoreline Bay Protection Standard, which was something that was in that last document, be a really key focus of this one. I think we're still figuring out where exactly it fits. I think we would be really interested in hearing from consultants on what is appropriate and for what infrastructure types maybe would we want to provide an elevation standard in the absence of maybe a locally driven coastal hazard analysis, for example, right? That was the intent of the One-Shoreline Bay Protection Standard, is to not have something that is available for people to reference without having to have an entirely new site-specific coastal hazard analysis. But that's something that I think is still fluid right now, what we're still in discussion about.
I see, but for the county assets, it would be prescriptive, right? I mean, the county is producing a document, so levies would be prescriptive if they are county owned and operated.
We are not a department of San Mateo County, so we are a separate special district that is focused on sea level rise, and our jurisdiction is contiguous with county boundaries, and we work very closely with San Mateo County, the jurisdiction, but we are not a county department, and so it would not be prescriptive to county assets, but we're hoping to collaborate with the county on having them incorporate the guidance.
I guess the only thing, Dilip, you were focused on the county. On the Bay side, there's extremely limited county assets that are, within the, let's say, zone of sea level rise or groundwater rise impacts. But certainly on the coast side, that's a big issue. And so that's why one of the reasons we have county representation from both their planning and building and sustainability departments, as McKenna said. Yeah.
Margot? Thanks, Dylan.
Hi, yes, this is sort of building on the last couple questions. What's your aspirational goal here? Is it to have all of the sort of partnering communities conform up to like an ideal standard? Are you looking for like, are you looking for like a regional analysis that says if everybody does this up to this standard, then here's what the benefits are? Or are you just hoping that folks take a look at what they already have and then this is just like a helpful resource for them if they want it, but not all the partnering communities are actually asking for it yet? Just curious sort of at that level what your aspirations are.
That's a good question. I would say the type of analysis you mentioned at the beginning there of like, if we all did this, this is the result. I don't think we're thinking at that kind of scale. What we're trying to do is seize every opportunity that we have today to make decisions that set us up for success in the future. I would say this is being asked for by a lot of, at least particularly I've heard a lot from public works departments specifically on the stormwater issue, that this is something that is becoming too overwhelming to handle, particularly coming out of last winter, something that we're continuing to face this winter with atmospheric rivers. And they're getting questions from their residents on what is the issue here? Like we can't exit our home, we can't drive on roads. So what are you doing in terms of upgrading your stormwater system to address this? So having guidance on what that looks like and how that could be implemented, how we take the way that we make decisions already on stormwater systems and think and layer on that additional consideration and huge consideration of extreme precipitation. What does that look like and how can we implement that? That is something that we're hearing from public works departments throughout San Mateo County. And I think that's what we're looking to address is what is an implementable, tangible way for you to start to think about this in your existing processes and documents. And it's going to require a paradigm shift. You're going to have to be willing to make some big commitments and shifts in the way that you think, but we're also going to try and do it in a way that speaks to the way you make decisions today and changes it so that we can think about climate resilience in that. It's a pretty broad answer, I think, to your question, but I would say that we're not looking to do something where, you know, if everyone's required to do this, it will result in this amount of less flooding. We're not looking necessarily on that scale. So, right, Len?
Yeah, I mean, we want to make it as easy as possible, and it's not easy. It's very, very difficult. We want to make it as easy as possible for local jurisdictions to start thinking about their public infrastructure and making decisions about their public infrastructure in a way that enables that infrastructure to perform under future conditions. That's our aspiration. And we would, greatly benefit from the expertise of you all and the proposal and firm or firms that are chosen in that effort. I think this is a very exciting opportunity for all of us to be working on something like this, and we'll certainly benefit from what others have done, but we're trying to kind of recreate something that, at least in this county and eventually in other counties, if this is a useful document, at least in this county, we can start aspiring towards that. So that's a good question. Thank you for that. Kenneth, if you want to wrap it up.
Yep. Yeah, we're now past time. Thank you for all your questions today. As I mentioned earlier, the questions we didn't get to, I know there's 2 in the chat we didn't get to, I will address and put on our FAQ document. And any other questions you have, please write us over email at projects@oneshoreline.org. And we look forward to hearing from you. With that, I'll close the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Stop sharing screens. And that's